long time in coming. Actually, this session is a replica of something that Raygun and AWS held in Seattle last year about this time. And it's taken us this long to replicate it in Auckland, or at least in New Zealand, which is Raygun's home. So just a bit of housekeeping. Bathrooms are out the door over there. And please, guys, we want this to be interactive today, so don't be shy. And the only thing that I can say is from AWS, just by the way, my name's Daryl. I look after the ISV segment, partner segment for AWS in New Zealand. That includes a lot of the ISVs that are here, all right, and the guys at Raygun, who are one of our top partners. And the cool thing about my job is that our ISVs and the organizations that are in New Zealand that are developing software don't just develop it for New Zealand. They develop it for a global scale. I mean, these guys here at Raygun, they do most of their business outside of New Zealand, all right? And that goes for a lot of other ISVs as well. Some people that you don't even hear of, all right? But they're big names in the US and in other places. So I've probably got one of the best jobs in the world because I get to help these guys go to market in different places. So, you know, just super happy to finally be here and in person and doing these things again. One thing that I just wanted to tell everybody about before we get started, I know that we've got Anna here from Vend. Any of the other Vend guys over here today? No? Well, guys from Vend, just want to say congratulations on your 10th anniversary. All right, well done, guys. All right. You're a hallmark of New Zealand ISVs going out globally. You guys have done an awesome job. Good luck for the next 10 years and beyond that, all right? We're super happy to be working with you guys and wish you going from strength to strength, all right? So, guys, without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to our panel, all right? I'm always a little bit concerned when I hand over to JD here, who's one of the founders of Raygun. The last time I saw him present at an audience, which was a couple of hundred people, he turned up, and the guy said to him, "Where are your slides?" And he said, "I don't have any." All right, and we all went, uh-oh, all right. And he walked out in front of the audience with no slides. It took him 5 minutes to drop the first F-bomb, all right. I just sat there going like this. An hour later, he walked off stage to a standing ovation. All right, so I'm expecting to be both informed and entertained today. So over to you guys for intros and all the rest. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daryl. Right, so yeah, thanks. So I'm going to be moderating the panel today, throwing some questions out. As Daryl mentioned, we would love this to be an interactive session, more conversational than just hearing answers from the folks on the panel. I'd also like to just extend a thanks to Amazon Web Services for helping put this together and helping host it here. I'd love to thank everybody here who came along. I know it's a busy time of year and traffic up here and all those sorts of things, so thank you very much for that. We're also live streaming today, so hello to all the people on the internet who are connecting through and watching this and not anything else online today. I'd also like to thank all of our panelists for coming along. I'll go through and do a quick introduction in a moment. Also to my colleagues at Raygun who did a lot of work to put all this together, and it always comes together so well. I get to come along and sit here and look like I had some involvement when I actually did very little. So thanks to them. There is a feedback and a form and a survey on your seat. The survey is super useful because we collate that up and provide the information back out to everybody afterwards as a sort of snapshot of what's going on in our ecosystem, particularly here in Auckland, so that you can have some takeaway learnings from that. Also on the feedback forms, really appreciate you being as open and honest as you can in that. It does help us improve these sessions, so I really appreciate that. There are bags out there with some swag when you're handing those in at the end as well. So do make sure you complete those. And with that, I will start doing some introductions. So we'll start with Emily. Emily, when we were kicking this off, she wanted to make sure that we were aware that she comes from the design side of the house. And so Emily's at Xero. She's helping sort of build up the design side of things there. And we will hear a little bit about the complete story around CX involving design and the technology side. We've got Josh from Tend. So Tend is a new startup. I actually, just as a small plug, if you are in Auckland and want to try the next generation of healthcare with your doctors, via an app or through their clinic, check it out. They just launched, but Josh was previously also at PushPay. So he's sort of seen the monumental growth. He's gone off and done something new, and I think it's going to be really interesting hearing about what he's taken as those lessons from PushPay through to a new startup. Then we have Anna from Vend. She is the current acting CEO there. We're going to be talking a little bit about how you handled COVID when you're selling to physical retailers, and obviously that's been a huge challenge in there. And then last but not least, we have Waruna here, and he is the group CEO at Lancom. And it was really interesting when we caught up before this talking about customer experience, because they both have a services part of their business as well as a SaaS product that has about 1 million daily active users, I think you said. And they help IT teams. And I loved the fact you kicked it off with nobody likes dealing with IT. So they've gone after a problem that just has or is known for having a very bad customer experience, and they're trying to make it awesome. So I think we've got a really strong panel here today to sort of go through the topic of how we can improve, measure, and make sure that our customer experience is phenomenal with the software that we're building. That's a lot of talking from me. So we are going to throw out some questions here, but I want to kind of get everybody here talking and then questions coming through as we go. There is a mic going around. I don't know who's kind of carrying that for people. If they put up their hand, we can get that out to throw some questions at the panelists as well. So I'm going to start with a prepared question, and then I hope we just kind of organically go from there. So I'm going to start with you, Emily, just because you're close. How have you come from a big company background with Amazon, Microsoft, you're now at Xero, which is a big company, slightly smaller than Amazon, but working on it. Yeah. So how have the priorities changed for you in that shift? And where do you see the future around customer experience with software and how you're measuring that?
So my journey's actually been interesting in that I was at Amazon when it was the same size as Xero. So it was in 2003 when the whole company fit in one building. And what's been fascinating about that is the parallels between those two worlds, just in different locations and different times. I would say the priorities, when I look back from then until now, in the design world have kind of stayed the same, to be honest. We wanted to, we always wanted to sit at the table. We were bottom feeders way back in the day. No one invited us to anything. We were like the losers in the company.
You're here now.
And then over the course of time, the value of design started to rise in businesses, and then it became really clear that when design, product, and engineering come together sort of equally, you can actually design and build amazing product. So I think for me personally, my priorities actually haven't shifted much. My voice has gotten louder personally at the table, and I've really worked very hard to make sure that customer is at the center of every conversation we have. I don't care what level you are in the business. Like, if the customer's not in the room with you when you're talking about a product problem or a problem you're trying to solve, you're likely not going to solve it correctly. So that's me.
Excellent.
On to you.
Well, yeah, I posed the question earlier, Josh. So you've come from PushPay, which has been a spectacular success. Now you're starting again. And I remember when we were expanding Raygun into Seattle, and I thought, this is great, it's like a startup. And I kind of forgot how much work we had to do to get it off the ground originally. How are you finding that change, and what are you doing differently in particular around CX?
Yeah, well, so I mean, I think tenders, the whole hypothesis of Tend is that there's a huge opportunity to reimagine the customer experience of primary healthcare. So, if you think about going to see a doctor in New Zealand, that experience really hasn't changed for 100 years, except that now you drive rather than riding a horse. But that's pretty much the only substantial change. You go to a doctor, you call maybe, I mean, I guess you can use a phone these days to book an appointment. But the whole hypothesis of Tend is that actually it should be reimagined from a CX perspective from end to end. And actually we have two sides because we're also reimagining our clinician CX as well. Mm-hmm. So we have kind of our customers, our users, but also actually there's huge problems with primary healthcare efficiency in terms of the tool chain they use and what they're asked to do. I just came out of a meeting where I was having a fight with someone about why we wouldn't make our clinicians do another job while they're in the middle of talking to people. But there's so much work that's been laid on to doctors and nurses that's not around healthcare delivery at all. It's around kind of bookkeeping and accounting and everything else. So for us, we started Tend with this idea that we could create a better experience, and then what we've done is kind of what I learned at PushPay in particular is just the value of research. So we've had a full-time user researcher working on Tend for over 12 months, and that was the first hire with a user researcher. We've done hundreds of interviews, we've done a whole bunch of qualitative stuff. We did 2 Brunton surveys of 1,000 people, and so we're kind of building a data set to kind of support making really good investment from a product and engineering perspective in terms of where are the opportunities to actually change a customer experience, how can we, part of the problem is that we kind of have this vision of where things need to be, but we actually need to bring people along on the journey. If we throw the ball too far down the field, then consumers are going to be like, what even is this? So we can't show up with an alien spacecraft and be like, beep, beep, take me to your leader. So really, really trying to be very incremental and iterative in terms of getting feedback from people early, and also trying to collect data sets that help support making good decisions about where we invest early so that we don't build the wrong thing. So far, we're a week in to a full launch. We're very, very, very pleased with kind of the conversion rates through our various funnels and kind of what the user experience is doing. It was so good actually that the Thursday before we launched, I got worried our analytics were wrong, and I made the engineers go and test everything because the conversion rates were way too good. But it turns out that's how it rolls. So, lots and lots and lots of preparatory work. But I think, I'm just going to launch into this, sorry.
Go on.
I think that consumers now are used to these incredibly high quality products. Instagram, irrespective of what you think of Facebook, is a phenomenally polished user experience. Netflix is incredibly good at sending me a push notification to say, here's a new show that you're likely to be interested in. And so kind of consumer expectations now, the bar for a consumer experience is phenomenally high. Consumers don't realize that there's hundreds of millions of dollars of investment in AI and ML supporting that recommendation engine and 15 or 20 years worth of engineering. They just expect things to work that way. And so as people that are building software, I think that we have to really think about how we're going to meet our customers' expectations, because if we don't, then someone else is, and we're going to lose their business.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I sort of feel like we've seen this trend where there's a really high expectation in that B2C space, and then people historically had been like B2B, whatever, it can be ugly, people will just have to endure it. That feels to me maybe a little bit, we're in around an area you're probably trying to solve a wee bit for, which is IT service stuff, not normally, I don't remember any sexy system in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, unfortunately, nobody wants to log a support case, and then you generally expect a really poor experience to begin with anyway. But I guess the problem that we break it down to is that, what is the expected outcome that somebody's trying to get out of their support experience, and then how can we align that with the experience or the appropriate experience. So the biggest thing is that you can actually go overboard, and you can go and say, we want everything to be faster, we want everything to be just right at the fingertips, we want it to be all AI ML driven, but the expected outcome in that process has to align with the appropriate experience. Is that you don't want to go overboard, because people's expectations along some things aren't going to change. So it's really about mapping out that journey for us and saying all the way from when they're about to log a support ticket to the outcome that they get, and how can we end on a high that they remember you and their experience really well, and then which points of the support experience do we need to actually wow people. Because most of the time you just expect it to be just normal, like you don't need to go overboard in every aspect to be able to provide a good experience. In fact, it'll be not remembered. So it's really about mapping out that journey and saying, how can we end on a high so that they had a really good experience, and which parts do we need whereby people are stressed, or they're in a, they can't get their printing out, or whatever it is. If we can wow them there, then that is actually an experience that they will likely to go through. So that's what the software currently does at the moment.
How did you figure out what that wow was?
So we start. The good thing about software is that there's only there's only a significant number of parts you can go down with your piece of software, right? They're quite well defined, and you can start mapping out those journeys. So the first one might be login a support ticket. The next one might be a VIP that needs to be coming on. The next one might be an onboarding or offboarding experience, and you can actually put some post-it notes and work out all the way from when they're working out, do I have a problem? Is it just for me? Is it for everybody else? all the way to, yes, I have a problem. Where do I go to log it next? Oh, crap, I can't remember my IT company. Who are they? You can actually, you can extrapolate these things out, and then you can point it out in this place to go, actually, this is where the biggest strain is for our user. And if we can change what the experience is there, then they will have a positive experience, and then we need to end on a high. There needs to be a wow moment that we can end on, that we can come back to. So, yeah, that's how we do our journeys around that.
Oh, I love that.
Sorry, that was probably long-winded.
No, it's all good. It's all good. And then, Hannah, like COVID-19, I think we're all both tired of it, but it's affected everybody. And with the retailers, I mean, I think we've been very, very fortunate in the technology industry to be broadly less impacted than some other industries. You sell to physical retail. They've obviously had a really hard time worldwide. What were some of the changes you put in place around trying to improve that customer experience when they're having such a bad time?
I'm just going to +1 Emily on the product engineering design one team. So at Vend, even though they report into different places, team meetings, decision, the whole thing runs as if it's one team, and I think that's so critical. COVID-19, wow. I think two things really happened for us. One was that the things that were critical for a great customer experience in a COVID world some were different and some were just accelerated. So things like, well, I can't get to my store and I can't physically sell, therefore omni-channel, which I've been thinking about for the last decade but not really doing much about, became quite important quite quickly. There were other things we thought about in terms of a great experience when we think about support, and things we did around what can we do at this point to make our retailers successful so that they're here out the other side of COVID. And we actually thought, what's the most important thing for them? And we just did whatever it took, and that meant doing things from kind of coupons and use the product for free for as long as you're in a lockdown, through to partnerships with others in the ecosystem, whether it's our partners like BigCommerce or banks that we work with, to say how can we put things together so that our retailers can get through what is a very uncertain and unknown time. And we also did a bunch of work, kind of thought leadership, like blogs and things we did to just kind of, here's the advice, here's the things you can do. We even gave our retailers access to sort of government subsidy information, like all the things we could do to help them survive. And then at the same time think about, okay, for those retailers that are going to survive, what are the things that will be different coming out the other side of this experience? And that also meant we thought about things that were on our product roadmap that needed to be accelerated, things that we did from a customer support perspective that needed to change, and really thought about what does great look like in a time of huge uncertainty for our customers. And one of the things which is actually hard for us to do, we stopped tracking CSAT during COVID-19. And we kept support CSAT because that's a very, because it's very clear, right? It's like I had this interaction, but things like ambient CSAT we stopped, which was nerve-wracking for us, but we just felt like our retailers are under a lot of pressure. They don't need another email right now asking if they're getting the most out of the product. So it was even down to those kinds of things about in their day, what matters to them, and that matters more to them now than us getting data about how they feel.
That's a great insight. What's been one of the biggest challenges that you've faced, Emily, in actually getting design to the table? Because it has been something that I felt we had a big change in that area over the last sort of 10 years. But in practical terms, let's say some of the folks here, maybe design is not yet a part of that conversation.
Yeah, I was going to ask for a show of hands how many folks have designers in their businesses.
Yeah. Full-time designers?
Oh, yeah. More than half.
Yeah.
I was actually thinking about this question as I was driving in. It's interesting. At Xero, I'm going to talk about Xero's journey specifically. When I came into Xero, we sort of called ourselves a design-led organization, and I would say that was incorrect. We were a customer-led organization, and that nuance is actually really important. The design world needed to pretty much have a total overhaul. And when I say overhaul, I mean we didn't even have a design process. We didn't have a hiring process that was specific to design, which is in research, which is a very different kettle of fish to hiring engineers in product. We didn't, there was just a lot of sort of foundational elements that were critical that we needed to put in place. And, we dropped we had quite a few folks leaving the organization, so we dropped down to like 49, and now the design organization's over 100. We now have all these foundational things in place. And what's been fascinating about this is watching design start to become central to dialogue in the business. So whether you're sitting over in the marketing world, whether you're sitting over in the, with the chief technology officer, design is more in the conversation than it's been previously, and it's been, the journey's been difficult to get to this point because people often, in fact, I was in a meeting recently and someone was like, oh, I'm about to show some eye candy, which was some design work. And I came off mute and I was like, if you say that again, I might kick you in the shin. Because I was, like, that's been
It's
what
diminishing it,
design's
yeah.
been sort of up against for the whole time we've been in tech. So it's just, I think it's, yeah, I guess that's all I have to say on that point. Yeah, I don't want to belabor it. Design's important.
That's very
I think it's interesting that both like Xero and Vend, from my outsider's perspective anyway, are both products that have existed in the market for, like, there's been accounting systems for a very long time, and there's been point of sale systems for a long time, and in both cases they've been awful to use. And I've looked at Vend and I've used Xero, and both of them are really quite beautiful in comparison to what the baseline was when those businesses were started. But like, almost the reason for the business is to say, actually, we can make this a lot better for you as a user than, and I kind of, like, my dad uses Xero. He's not an accountant, he's a business owner. I can't imagine him using another general ledger product. Like, he wouldn't be able to do it. But he can use Xero, and I know lots of people that use Vend that are not technologists, and in the point of sales whole ecosystem is a dumpster fire, right? But you've made this beautiful thing, and you've got a whole business around it, and it's, I think that in itself kind of speaks to where there's opportunities for success is to actually out-innovate existing well-entrenched products with something that's much, much better and well considered from a user perspective.
Yeah, and when we talk about what we think Vend's sort of competitive advantages in the point of sale space is that combination of beautiful, easy to use, easy to learn, but then very kind of grunty on the workflow side. And what we think when we look at our kind of core competitive set is there are some who spike on the beautiful, but it's like, but it can't do anything. And then those that are like super grunty, but you're like, but no, like no one can use that. And it's actually this constant kind of tension and excitement and evolution around how do we build something that is complex, but actually feels easy and beautiful. And that's also, I think, why this product engineering design, and more recently at Vend kind of commercial, all working together. You can't get it if you're not all trying to solve the same problem and bringing those different perspectives. So I think that's been critical for us.
Question from my side is that how do you solve the tension between developers and designers? Because designers tend to come up with beautiful designs that developers take a very long time to deliver. How do you work through that kind of tension? Because the developers kind of throw up their hands and go, what is this?
Designers were throwing them up first. It's a really good question. I have a philosophy that product design engineering kind of get in bed together at the start. And I think that when you do that, like, I've been in meetings where the engineers actually had a better design idea than half the designers in the room. You know what I mean? And so it's actually not about, I don't see that happen that much anymore. I saw that a ton. Like, I cried a lot the first 10 years of my career because oftentimes I was the only designer in the room and the engineerings were like full of salt. And so, and they would often tell me no. And then I felt like I had to like learn more about why was it a no? I don't see it that much anymore because I feel like if you start on the journey together, you're less likely to end up in that place, right? Because the designer's not going to go off and design something that's in cuckoo la la land because you've gotten to the point together as a cohort, you know what I mean? Versus it being sort of design chucking it over the fence, which is how it used to be.
I feel like I'm in your first 10 years of
I think there's also a piece too about the customer obsession, because if what you're thinking about is what is the customer problem to solve, and in tandem those teams are addressing that, it kind of resolves itself somehow. Like if the engineer has the better design idea, then that trumps it because that is the
Yeah.
customer problem to be solved.
Yeah, I
But
think,
there is something there about the mutual respect and working
Yeah.
together from the
From the
start.
very beginning.
Yeah, like I
Yeah,
just can't imagine
that's
a session we would have at Vend where you wouldn't have all of them in the room. Like it would be
Yeah.
odd.
I screwed up on this last week because we were rushing to get something out the door, and so a couple of the designers went away and did something and then chucked it over the fence to the engineers, and the engineers cried. And I was like, it's the first time it's happened and for me at Tend, and I was like, "Oop, that was a mistake, let's not do that again."
right.
And like it was time pressure and startups, it's fine, but like when you do that, the outcome is always going to be that there's this hidden backlog, and then it gets revealed to you as a developer, and you're going to be like, well, and the developer in this case was really good. He was like, it would be much better if I could have been involved in the initial conversations around this, because I could have simplified some of the
Yeah.
implementation.
Yeah.
But we didn't do that, and but it was a really good reminder for me to go, are we getting the right people in the room at the right time?
Yeah. One thing that I've been sort of debating in my head recently is, at Xero we have a lot of products. We actually have quite a few products and teams, and we're scaling at sort of alarming's not the right word, but we're scaling quickly. And I've been thinking a lot about, like, people will come up with really good solutions, but they're looking for a customer problem. And that is something that I'm starting to see more and more of, not just at Xero, but just generally. Like, people will have a good idea, and then they backpedal to who's the customer that's solving this, that we're solving this for. And it's been a really good question to ask in meetings. When you start to sense it, you're like, what's the problem we're solving? And people are like, not unclear.
Yeah, not confusing cool with useful, or in demand.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
We talk about it as jobs to be done,
Yeah.
and we're really clear on like the 4 or 5 jobs that a retailer needs to get done. And so the thing that we're solving, like which job is it? Is it making it more beautiful? Is it making it faster? Is it making it simpler? But it's not like, let's just go and solve this thing that could be interesting. And I think that's probably an evolution for Vend as well, as we think about kind of the journey we've been on around customer experience, because it's in our DNA, like our values are about customers. But I think sometimes we project it onto our customers, like here's this cool thing we've built, like they'll love it, as opposed to going, what actually are they trying to do? What makes them successful? And like build that, not build the thing that we think is cool. And of course you have a few fringy things that are cool, and like there's an edge case user. But I think there is a temptation sometimes to imagine what you think your customers want, rather than looking at the data or the interviews to say this is actually what they're trying to do. And sometimes it's the boring stuff that actually is the thing that your customer really wants.
Exactly.
I think jobs to be done. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that's, for me, I think is probably the most powerful insight that I've had in the last 12 months, is actually we've switched now to using job stories rather than user stories. And it seems like a small thing, but it actually makes such a big difference, because it's not as I need to, it's when I need to, blah, I need so-and-so so that I can. And like just even framing up the conversations we're having around features, around what we're going to do with the roadmap in terms of those jobs to be done, has been really powerful in terms of helping kind of really bring the focus onto what does the customer need here, rather than sort of putting layers in between that just actually make that hard to actually grasp.
Yeah,
And
we
then put a
ac-
metric on the job to be done.
Yeah.
Yeah, we actually
Adoption,
developed
engagement, satisfaction.
a whole suite of journey maps around that concept, because what we are realizing is that the way we're set up, corporate underpants, which you guys probably heard that term, but the way we were structured internally, the products were starting to look like our corporate underpants. So this sort of jobs to be done journey mapping exercise helped us to show the connective tissue between all the EGMs that were overseeing you know what I mean? And that's been a game changer. Game changer. Walls are down.
To make sure I understand corporate underpants, that's the idea of you're effectively shipping your org structure right in the product. People can understand.
Yeah.
Cool. Gotcha.
Yeah.
That's all good. I hadn't heard it called that. Must
Yeah.
be
That's a good phrase.
Yeah.
I'm going to use that.
Yeah, no, it's really helpful.
Yes, sir.
I have a really dumb question. So, what is the difference between product and design in terms of disciplines?
That's a great question.
Do you want us to take that one?
Over to you.
I was looking at it. Or why don't you take it?
Well, I was
Why
going
don't
to
you
say
start
was
with
that
product. Maybe.
well, I was just going to say that Audrey Cheng, who was VP of Product until recently, did a really, really good talk at Mind the Product on this about 6 months ago, and I'd highly encourage you to go and look that up, because I think there is there can definitely be friction between design and product about really who's in charge.
That's it.
And
It's about who's in charge.
But it is about who's in charge, and I think ultimately
That's the
designers historically, and I think this is changing, but have not had accountability for commercial outcomes, and product should have. And so design always has to support product, because ultimately whoever the product manager is for a feature or a product is the one that holds the P&L for the outcome, the actual outcome. But there's, I mean, at PushPay, for example, like the product and design research function in particular worked so closely together. Chris Stevens, who's here, kind of did a lot of work in that area with us when he was with PushPay. And, I think there's product researchers typically are better ethnographic interviewers and researchers than most product managers. They've typically trained more for it. They're better at asking open-ended questions. And so the way that we ran this at PushPay anyway is that typically a user researcher would run a research session, and product managers and also engineers and testers would sit in, but that would be led by a researcher, and then they would collaborate together to produce a sort of synthesis of the kind of research outcomes in terms of what they discovered and what they'd learned about, user stories or jobs to be done or whatever else, and then kind of use that to feed into product planning and prioritization and everything else. But the ultimate prioritization decision is, the accountability of that is always on the product manager, because they're the ones that are on the hook for, we've spent this much money on time and whatever, what have we got for it?
We're navigating some pretty intense tension around this very
bet you
topic
are.
right now. Yeah. And we're going, just through like a racy model,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Yep.
That's one tactic we're trying to see if it will simmer the frustration. And I'm also trying to figure out how the fuck do you make, F-bomb.
That's
Sorry
right.
about
That's the
that.
first
Scores
one.
just
I
went up.
know, sorry. Surprise Wes.
Daryl will be
Took
happy.
that long. How do we make design accountable? That's actually something I'm spending a lot of time thinking about. Uh-oh.
From a design perspective, how do you do a competitive analysis? So, for example, if you were to look at last year in YOB, in the same space, how do you compare yourself as a competitor in the design space?
We tend to come at it from this is more of a traditional phrase, but sort of we do expert reviews of the product. So we sort of map one-to-one, so the journey maps I was talking about before. We start to sort of go through the experience of MYOB and look at it through a design and experience lens. So how many steps did it take to get from A to B? What are the barriers to entry? Like we go through the same protocol you would with a usability test. And then you start to then map it out to how does that relate to the work you're doing inside the company you're sitting in. So we tend to do quite a bit of expert review. Just to that's the only way you can get a handle on what your competitors are doing, really. And understand from an experience perspective, not features, also trying to lift up from just feature world. Yeah. Yeah, the experience from like the moment, your first touch point, like even what are you feeling emotionally when you interact with it, and then what does that look like as you're moving through it? So where are the buttons? Are the buttons prominent? I mean, I'm getting specific, but you know what I mean.
One of the things we've done, less on kind of competitive analysis, but we talked about that thing that we care about around how easy is it to use, and we have like a sentiment tracker for jobs to be done that are very frequent and very important, so we can track, are we delivering on that promise? Now you can debate, is that design or product, but it's also getting that real feedback on how easy are people finding it, because easy is the thing we're trying to solve for through design.
How are you measuring that sentiment?
Like a instant user feedback.
Oh, like little
For that feature?
in-app
For that particular, it's
Oh,
usually
for
at a
that
workflow
workflow.
level, so sometimes it might be like closing a register or syncing your inventory, and that's trying to take it sort of a couple of clicks down from a CSAT point of view, which is like, hey, this is something we've just shipped or something we've just done. Is it delivering on that promise of ease of use?
So is there like a little MPS widget style thing pops up and you click it, smiley faces or something?
Yeah.
Like when you arrive at the airport.
Yeah, that's
right.
the
How
idea,
do you
yeah.
find the
And we think about all across the kind of product journey, we're looking for, we talked about jobs to be done, and then like I'm a big fan of putting metrics on top of it. So we look at like what's the adoption, what's the engagement, and then what's the satisfaction.
Yep.
And so you can track, okay, so loads of people are taking this up, but then they're not using it the way that we expected them to, or they are, or people are taking this up, they're using it, but they're saying it's horrible to use. So then we can kind of figure out adoption, engagement, satisfaction, and we just keep that loop going, and then that sort of loop expands out to support. So what's the support tickets going back into product and engineering, sales going back into product and engineering. So there's just these feedback loops of what are our potential customers telling us and what are our existing customers telling us, and how do we think about...
One of the things that we did at PushPay quite effectively was using that same kind of methodology really, particularly on some kinds of tasks, and just kind of looking at how long it was taking and then going, okay, how can we shave stuff? So we'd actually have kind of like histograms of timing for kind of things, and then we'd sit down as a product team and go, okay, like this is currently taking 20 minutes to do, what can we do? And we can get like incredible savings, like down to sort of 2 minutes, 10x. And that was really effective for some kinds of workflows. It doesn't fit everything, but it's a really nice way of kind of thinking about how you can demonstrate value.
Yes, and we do that sort of prioritised on the workflows that the retailer uses the most. So things like your first inventory sync or your register closure, like kind of quality and speed. So is it reliable? Does it work every time? And how fast is it? Because it needs to be fast because I'm doing it all the time. And in general, I would say, faster products are like faster is better, right? So there's but we prioritize on the kind of core jobs to be done. There'll be fringe cases where we're like, oh, we wish that was faster, but it's like, it's just always a prioritization call, right?
Do you always get CSAT scores for those specific things that people are, as in like, it's really hard to get CSAT scores
constantly
from a large user base, because they just, they get to the end of something, it either works or it doesn't, and then they kind of move on. So, what's considered a good feedback, percentage of CSAT scores for you to be able to gauge whether what you're doing is working or not working?
Yeah, so on CSAT we do it at a more macro level. So either we try and get CSAT at a moment of truth. So we've just had a support interaction, I've just been onboarded, and then ambient is our proxy for kind of product and people together. When we're looking at sentiment, then I actually don't know what we count as statistically significant, but we try and do it again at that moment of truth. Like, I've just completed the task, I've just completed the job, and it's a very simple, like, that was easy, that was not.
Yeah, I mean, in our industry, most people try and align CSAT to loyalty, and that is a big no-no in the support industry, because a good satisfaction doesn't naturally correlate into loyalty. So if they can get something for cheaper or somewhere else, they would switch, as opposed to we try and gauge especially in a MSP, which is like an IT provider. You think the more higher CSATs that you're getting, your customers are a lot more loyal to what we're trying to do, whereas in a service industry, that's not the case at all. They may switch, so it's one of those weird metrics that we can look at. It's better than having dissatisfaction, obviously, they will switch, but having CSAT doesn't mean that they won't switch. So it's just it's just interesting to see how it works in a larger software.
So how do you track loyalty, other than churn?
Usage.
Usage. Churn,
Usage.
Exactly right.
But do you get a perverse problem then that, let's say a company is your customer and all of their printers just break every day, so usage is through the roof, but they're actually having a really bad experience? Like, how do you reconcile usage?
Correct. I mean, what we find is that if you're having a really bad support experience, you generally don't put in any CSAT. Because, you don't want to tell the IT guy that's about to fix your thing that it's crap, because you don't want to piss them off. So generally you look somewhere else and you leave. And that's where the customer success managers and the account managers, and actually having a relationship with those customers, is a far better metric, and to discuss those sort of things, as opposed to just relying on CSAT feedback through a platform. Because you are interacting with humans, and service is very much human-based, so we try and switch back to that, whereas people go, oh no, I'm getting 99% CSAT feedback, But then you find there's a cohort of customers that are just not putting in any CSAT feedback at all because they're dissatisfied.
This is what I quite like about the panel structure is that, you know, you go and read a blog post about some of the stuff and you kind of get things presented like a one-size-fits-all. It's the reason we dropped MPS was that in our crash reporting product, it would pop up and be like, how likely are you to recommend this to a friend? And it's like, well, they've only come in saying your system is broken and you're trying to fix it as fast as you can. And we're like, hey, do you love us? And it's like, get the out of here. So you get some pretty brutal responses there. It didn't correlate with anything for us.
Yeah,
for
Yeah.
our
exactly
audience,
right.
yeah.
But that's why I think for us, like CSAT is a really important measure of satisfaction, but that's why we see it as part of the journey of adoption, engagement,
Yeah.
and satisfaction.
Yep.
And so our probably leading indicator of loyalty is the adoption and the
Yep.
usage.
Yep.
And then we want to, I guess, there's more of an aspiration around the experience as opposed to that being the indicator that tells us, yeah,
Is that adoption of individual features? Is that the level that you're measuring that at? Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that as a process. Yeah.
yeah.
And how do you drive awareness around some of these metrics relating to customer experience throughout the org? I mean, you know, people throw stuff up on a TV and hope somebody pays attention. One person maybe owns a key metric, but like how are you actually building a culture around the customers using these measures? And I'll open that to whoever wants to jump in first.
Oh, I can talk about that because that's a journey we've been on,
Yeah.
and it's a live journey. I think a few things have happened. One is I think historically we were a bit more separated in terms of product engineering, design, and commercial. And I think through thinking about customer experience more broadly, we've found like the common language, and we use net revenue retention as the thing that helps everyone, commercial, engineer, product design, think about, well, which part of that piece, you know, am I contributing to? And that's created kind of a shared language around, it's not just a sales thing, it's not just churn, it's like, what is the lifetime value for that customer? So that's been kind of a bit of a journey. The other thing, which is why I'm going on about metrics, we keep talking about it, is I think now we've got this kind of, we're starting to build this language around what are the jobs to be done and what's the activity that the customer does that tells us that they're completing that job. So one of the things that we've unpacked is we need our retailers to be trading 5 days out of 7. So we call it 5D7. We know if you get to 5D7, you probably, like the chances of you churning are almost zero unless it's a business failure reason. So what's the leading indicator for 5D7 is the number of products you have uploaded and how quickly you do that after activating. So then the whole company can understand 5D7, and that's a metric we talk about at a company level now, and it's actually much more engaging for people than churn or sale, like all these metrics that they're like, the other team does that. It's like sales needs to sell to people that are going to get to 5D7. Our onboarding team needs to do that. Product needs to be thinking about what they're building and the things they're putting in the app, because we know if we get that, then the customer will be successful, and we'll probably add 3 or 4 more 5D7s as we figure out, you know, the most critical jobs to be done. But certainly having a metric and an activity has kind of galvanized the organization around it, rather than it being sort of this dashboard number that no team, like everyone intellectually understands, but no one can really see what their job is in doing that. And it's also shifted it much more to being customer obsessed, you know? So rather than churn, it's like, this is the job to be done. What are we all doing to get that retailer to do that thing? And that's also a bit more inspiring than just, I don't know, like a chart that says, here's who churned, and you're kind of like, well, does that really me?
Yeah, we ran into, well, I ran into similar things at Raygun, which was, I tend to think in terms of usual SaaS metrics, right?
Yeah.
Just because I do. And then we sort of started pivoting that to focusing on the data volumes. And even though they were almost a one-to-one proxy,
Yeah.
it was a much more exciting number to look at and got people more involved in it. We did end up flipping a little bit back through COVID times when it was like, hey, let's get real. Money is something we want to focus on right now.
Yeah.
And then kind of go, but we will go back to the data side of it.
Yeah, but I think you're making a really valid point, which is the SaaS metrics matter, like that.
Yeah.
They are the metrics, but it's how do you get the leading indicator or the customer metric that everyone can mobilize around? And like you say, for us, 5D7 is almost a one-for-one leading indicator of churn. So yeah, finance is looking at churn, and we show everybody churn, but people are now clear. The thing we do to move that number is a customer activity, and each team knows how they can do something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Then there's a kind of, now everyone knows the outcome we're going for. So design, product, engineering, finance, sales is around, that's the customer outcome we want.
That's awesome. Excellent.
It's been a journey though, like that's, we've got one metric off the, you know, like fully embedded, fully understanding, but that's also part of the customer discovery, right? It's like, what is the next job to be done? And because you get the wrong metric, then you drive, you know, the wrong, you get really bad outcome. So there is a journey just to go, are we really now clear on how we crystallize the job to be done internally, and then you can be quite loud about it.
Awesome. We have 15 minutes left, so I can see Andre's passing out the mic there. Let's try some more questions.
Just walk away just to not speak anybody. We are talking about customer experience and that we want to know what the customer wants more and more. But what I keep seeing as a user that I keep changing different projects, just start working with SharePoint as an example. Talk about Microsoft, nobody's here from Microsoft, right? So I see every day the Office 365 change, and I have a new feature that I didn't want or didn't ask for.
Yep.
But every time that I try to do a new thing, I step in a problem that when I go through the internet and Google that, I see those forums where people suggest, give an example, like quick links in SharePoint doesn't open the new tab. You go there, that thing's open since 2016.
Yep.
Customers, lines of customers request for, oh, please, can you solve that? So where we are losing that we want to know so much from the customer, but we are ignoring the customer most of, part of the time at least. Where it went wrong.
It's a good question. Yeah.
I really like what Anna's saying, because I think lots of software companies go through this journey where for a long time the objective is to kind of crap out features as fast as you can to kind of get product market fit for various segments of your kind of target customer base. And then it seems like everyone goes through this moment where they step back and look at all the things they've built and realize that 90% of them aren't being used and that customers don't know about them and that they haven't really moved the needle. And I'm smiling at Chris because we did this together at PushPay, and we did something very similar where we were like, actually what we need to do is find out what are because the SaaS metrics are all lagging metrics, and what are the leading metrics and what are the attention metrics against those is actually the really important question.
Yeah.
And so we came up with a similar thing, very raw we there, but you know, where we ended up just kind of red, amber, greening our customers based on this one underlying metric, which was transaction volume essentially, or sales, you're going to call it. And there's a lot of data science behind it and lots of linear regressions and all sorts of nonsense you don't really care about. But we could basically cohort our customers out and say, okay, these customers are super high performing compared to their peers that are similar in nature. And these ones are super underperforming. And then we could look at what features, what's the difference between the ones that are and aren't, what features are they using versus not. And then we could sick both kind of the product team, the product marketing team, and most importantly, the customer success team on those low performing customers. And what we found is that over sort of 12 or 24 months, we were able to get those huge fraction of those low-performing customers from red, which was a very high predictor of churn, or amber, up. Maybe not all the way up to green, but definitely kind of tilt that curve up. And that meant that actually the focus for the product and engineering teams moved from let's build more features to how do we make the existing features work better or be more discoverable or more integrated into other process flows or workflows or jobs to be done for customers, because I kept on going to customer conferences and talking to people and they're like, oh, it'd be really good if you added so-and-so, and it's like, that's been in there since 2015.
Yeah, and that's also part of why we're driving this adoption engagement piece, because often we find our customers might have joined us 2 years ago, they haven't kept up with all the development in the, so you get this, you're like, where's this feature? It's like, we shipped that 2 years ago. And so again, it's going, which features matter and how do we make sure that our users are adopting them? I think the other comment I would make is one of the journeys we've been through also is how do we get customer feedback to the product engineering and design teams in a way that they will hear it. Because you end up with the most kind of recent bias from the sales team. Like, I just couldn't close that deal because of that feature, and all the engineers are like, forget about it. Or you have a support ticket and they're like, oh, it's just those edge customers. And so one of the things we have done to try and increase that kind of feedback is in our customer support function, our swim lanes mirror the swim lanes in product and engineering. And so then here is the feedback from the team that does, whatever it is, inventory or billing or payments, area of specialization, and there's a much better sort of codification and quantification of the issue. Like, it's these many customers with this, you know, this is the number of hours we're spending with customers on this problem, and that shared language but also giving the data to product and engineering in a way that they respected the data. And I think we had to move, some of it is still qualitative through interviews, but it was a bit ad hoc for a while, just sort of like Slack channels of like, customers hate this, and an engineer struggles to prioritize that. So I think that's also a big piece of how do you get those feedback loops, so there's alignment across the different teams on like, that feature needs to be fixed or shipped, and that's a bit noisy, it's that salesperson again, or it's that customer support person, or it's like that exec with their pet favorite, can you get that thing in the product? So I think there is something there too around getting the feedback structured in a way that teams can act on it.
The other challenge, though, is that stage of company. So Microsoft is going to be drowning in feedback,
Totally.
right? They're never going to complete that backlog. Then you get the smaller organizations where they're so hungry for feedback. And we have one customer, they're quite large, I'm not allowed to name them, but we track the performance for their app, and they peaked at about 87 million concurrent users of their app, so they're quite big. And one of their reasons for working with us was they deliberately set out to find a smaller org that would listen, because they knew if they went for the giant orgs, they would be, even despite their size, just another random voice saying, can the links open in a new tab? To wrap up on your question, the ultimate answer is to stop using SharePoint. Sorry, there was another question up here. I will grab the mic just for the live. I think it's more for the live stream people, yeah.
Kia ora everyone, Jason Fox. I just wanted to get your thoughts about the way clients were viewing security and assurance. And then also any of your experiences about that over the last 10 years, whether there's been significant breaches about that thing.
Yeah, sure. Security and compliance.
Jeez.
Yeah.
You know, I can look at it from a service perspective. I mean, we've gone from security from being a division that looks after it, being external, to now being hygiene as part of our products these days. So security is actually built into our products, and it needs to take a first-class citizen. It always used to be this mantra around having a third party that was focused on security all day, every day, and they knew what they were doing, and they were the guys working at the NSA or whatever it is, and therefore that's who you went to now in our products. It ultimately needs to be secure by design, and actually having engineers and security people working together to be able to do that. I mean, there is it also depends on the type of organization you are and the type of software that you're building in terms of how large your attack vector is. At the end of the day, they're not going to come to a startup that's got no money to be able to exploit. And equally, if your data is sensitive and it is out there, and it is like Xero, for example, there's financial data that you can exploit, you'll be a much larger attack vector than those startups. So it's really about taking one of those common sense approaches into, what is your attack vector? What is it that you're trying to protect? What is it that's desirable by undesirables to be able to put out to the internet, and then really working with your product teams to go and say, well, this is our crown jewels, and how do we protect that at all cost? And working through that in a priority kind of manner. You always have to work with external organizations and security officers, because it's a moving beast. It's insane in terms of what's happening right now. But 10 years ago, the other thing is that public cloud platforms like Amazon and AWS Amazon and Microsoft weren't really available and readily available. You had to build all of that infrastructure yourself. So I could never secure my product the way I can now, because I'm consuming these things where people are spending hundreds of millions of dollars. So the best way to look at it is that don't try and build it yourself. Always try and consume it in, and then make that a first-class citizen of your product.
So we're saying in the 10 years you haven't been concerned about it?
Oh,
No, I don't think we're saying we're not concerned. I would say two things. So our security team sits in engineering, as opposed to, say, the legal team, which sits kind of closer to finance. So security for us has always been an issue, or a thing we care about because of the level of data we have. I think one of the things I have observed, and it's not in the last 10 years because we didn't exist, but is the customer sophistication around data. So, there's so much more awareness of things like GDPR or CCPA or things happening that there's probably a increased expectation or level of sophistication. We take I guess, for a company our size, we try and balance, like, what are the, to your point, like, where are the things that are most likely to matter to our retailers? Where could we be most vulnerable, and how do we invest in those areas and do all the kind of, bounty programs, all those kinds of things to try and keep building your resilience. What we have noticed is, as we have more sophisticated customers coming on board, that becomes a hygiene factor, and so there is kind of this push-pull of us doing what we think is right, and also the changing demands of customers that help sort of, I guess, extend you beyond the legislation or the kind of expert advice, and what matters to different customers. But we haven't yet, touch wood, had to deal with a breach, but I think the mindset we take is like, it's a question of when, not if, and so how are we always building towards minimizing the when.
Yeah. I'd just add to this that one thing that I'm starting to notice more is ensuring that the governance function, the board of directors, that they're mindful on their risk registers, that a security breach is actually, for most software companies, potentially one of the most disastrous things that could happen for them.
Yeah.
And as you say, we're all sort of going, this does almost feel inevitable. You could spend infinite funds and still be having issues there. But the biggest change in that last 10 years, from my point of view, has been the increased awareness around privacy, like with GDPR. And, to be honest, it was a real pain to build in the systems to be able to filter out and take that data out upon request, or dump it all out for people when they wanted it. And I sort of, as the leader of a software company, it was somewhat frustrating because it kind of came in, landed on the roadmap. I was like, oh my goodness, this is not going to really sell any more seats, is it? But then as a consumer of software, it was like, this is the right thing to do. So that to me has been a big area of change in the last 10 years.
I think that, just to add a little bit, I think the implicit thing that both Anna and Warren have mentioned is that there's been a move, like 10 or 15 years ago, the security team was quite often the Department of No. And they really were. And I remember seeing a talk from the Etsy CISO a few years ago where he talked about how he physically relocated the security team to a hallway with a huge stack of lolly jars with a web camera on it to make people come and talk to them. He was trying to lead a cultural transformation within that business. And even now, like, I was just talking to a friend who used to work with us at PushPay, who ran the security function there for a little bit, and he's actually transitioned in his business in Australia from being a security team to actually being a product manager specializing in security, which I think is a really, really, really good step forward, because actually you need that involvement in security right at the beginning, like you do with design. And I mean, the number of conversations I've had with designers were like, we don't want it to work this way, and it's like, well, it works that way because it needs to work that way. And so actually having an expert voice, or at least someone who owns that kind of perspective at the very beginning of kind of working out what you're going to build and how you're going to build it, I think is really important to kind of make sure you're building the thing right.
Yeah, cool. Might have time for one more question. Sam Jarman, is it? Yeah.
Howdy. I'm pretty early on my career, maybe 6 years in, and I've had leadership who have very much valued lean design and lean products, make it better than it was yesterday, just get something out the door, not necessarily ugly, but just a little bit better, kind of incrementing towards the product we want it to be. And I've just come out of a job where the leadership was more, let's just ship the best thing on the product as we thought of this feature. Let's be first out the door, but also best out the door, and leave anyone trying to copy us months behind rather than just days behind. How would you sort of balance those in your orgs, and which ones are right?
Right, we're actually having this debate inside Xero now, because we tend to want to ship things fast, but it doesn't mean, like, it probably wouldn't meet my bar, if that makes sense. So we're having a debate now of, like, do we wait and do what's right, get it exactly how we want it, or do we just get it out and get the feedback and start the process now? I think it really depends on your business and your appetite for risk, customer experience risk. This is something I've been thinking about a lot, actually. And your appetite to shut it down if it's not working, or right? Like, that's another one. So if you put something out and it shits the bed, then shut it down. It's okay. It's software. You can actually go back and fix it. But to answer your question, which one is better, I can't answer that. I mean, it really depends on your business. Yeah.
Isn't it about maximizing learning? So ship something imperfect to a few customers if you think that you need the learning that it's going to give you. Whereas if you are copying a competitor feature that you know absolutely works for them, it might be better to wait to make it perfect because you already know that feature is going to be hit. So is it about maximizing learning?
I think, I mean, maybe about 5 or 6 odd years ago, in terms of the MVP and the lean startup methodologies, and failing fast and getting something out there quick, was really a fad, and people expected things to be kind of broken, and they would work out how to get data back. But these days, in high-end polished apps, they just expect a certain experience that they just don't even entertain. So you do need to get it to a certain bar whereby you're actually, it meets a quality standard to be able to be in front of somebody to be able to collect that data. Otherwise, people just switch off.
Yeah, and I think it's also how nimble you are. So if you work in an organization where you can put something out that's going to be a learning moment, so to speak, and your tech is healthy enough that if it's not going well, that you can change it quickly. At Xero, we've got instances where we've got code base that's a decade old. So we don't have a lot of opportunity to have learning moments, so to speak, in the wild. But there's other parts of the business where it's a much healthier code base, and we can do what you're saying, but it does have to be a certain bar. Like the Airbnbs of the world have made it really hard for product, right? Because they've prioritized design. And that, like I was thinking about earlier, like they've created a movement, right? Like they stood up and said, design, we value design enough that we're going to have it either, I don't know if they have a chief design officer, but it's, it's at the top. And so that's, it's a good question. That was a really good question.
There's a piece too, I think, around, you said optimize for learning. Some of the discussion we have, whether it's in product or other areas, is what we're putting out there going to get us the data that we want? Because if you put something out and it doesn't work, are you like, well, did it not work because there's no demand? Did it work because it didn't work because it was ugly? It didn't work because we didn't enable the sales team? And so I think you've got to balance that. We definitely have an approach of A/B test and test and learn, but we've got to be clear, like, what are we testing, and is what we're putting out there of sufficient quality that we actually get something useful back? And that's probably the bar yes, customer experience, but there is an element of, if it's just doomed to fail because it's so bad to start with, you're not going to learn anything. Exactly, yeah. So there is something there around, like, again, what's the outcome? And is this a proxy for the outcome that gives us something that says do more or do less, rather than, I know it was bad, but we don't really know why. Then you can't do anything with that.
There's the nobody likes burnt pizza analogy, I think. So in a rush to start a food truck, you want to get it out, you want to get it going, but you're burning the pizza, and all you learn is that nobody likes burnt pizza.
Yeah, I mean,
I've never heard that. That's a good one.
I mean, I think it's a super context-dependent question, because there's so many possible business variables. I've come from a regulated industry to another regulated industry, so that adds some complexity. But I mean, it's a very, very long time since I built a feature where it wasn't incrementally rolled out, and where we didn't kind of have the opportunity to kind of talk to some early users of it and say, hey, would you be interested in testing this, or you've told us you're interested in the ability to do this. We're building it. Would you work with us to help build it? And I can't imagine building software any other way, to be honest, because the other way is really expensive and risky.
And we also do that sometimes where we've had a cohort of customers tell us that they want something, right? Or there's been, when we've got it ready, we will go to those customers, either as an adoption technique, like, hey, that thing you raised 2 years ago, like, it's finally fixed, here it is, you got it, which is a new muscle as well. We haven't always done that, but also trying to find these beta users or power users, and they have a different tolerance, right? Because they're like, yeah, sure, I want to test it, and if it breaks, then I know that that's what I'm signing up for.
Actually, I think that's a really, really good point. Our head of kind of user experience, Jazz, who I've worked with now in 2 different jobs, when I first met her, the first thing that she talked about was, we need to set up a way of recruiting user research subjects. And I was like, who the hell are you? You've just started working for us and I've got no idea what you're talking about. And then when we started 10, she was like, how are we going to recruit user research subjects? And I was like, I know where you're going with this. But having a way to get a hold of people to talk to about things is actually like
It's critical.
and actually quite hard.
It's really hard.
We know them by
Especially in
name.
this part of the world.
We know the retailers by name.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
Call them.
And also like across there's lots of organisational and political boundaries and like what was it, the underwear?
They're corporate underwear, yeah.
Corporate underwear kind of problems where marketing want to control that relationship or
Or
product does and trying to do that in a way where actually we're all going to win.
Yeah.
But having a way to identify people that are interested in working with you to give you feedback is, I think, fundamental.
Yeah, we've started coaching product folks on how best to interview
Yeah,
so that everybody can do it.
Yeah.
I don't want to be a bottleneck. I don't want my organization to be a bottleneck.
I just add though to that, Sam, I don't think it's a defensible competitive advantage for like, hey, we got this out for a short window of time. Like you're really thinking about a feature or a capability as a multi-year delivery to the business. So if it was saying, hey, well, you know, somebody's going to copy. I mean, we've had people copy Raygun stuff where they literally just save the JavaScript and the same bugs are in the code, right? Like that'd be there 1 minute later. And sadly, we can't capture the market in that 1 minute. But yeah, so, but I think there's been really great answers.
Launch and love. This is a good one. Launch and love, don't launch and leave.
Yeah, that's great.
That's really common.
Yep. Actually, well, as
On
a
that note.
no, I think one point on that around CX is and I don't think people talk about it enough, is that feature tracking. And then we've kind of gone through and just been like, which things do we need to chop out to keep the code base as tight as possible on what matters? Because sometimes you do get things wrong.
Well, it's way more expensive to retire a feature than it is to build one. And until you've actually had to do that a few times, I think you don't necessarily fully appreciate that. But
with that, though, we are out of time. We will be hanging out here for a while, though, so will some of the panelists here. I'd just like to again to extend a, what are you waving your arms for, Andre? Surveys. Please fill out the surveys. But we will be milling around for questions. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming, and I'd really appreciate it if you could give a round of applause for the excellent panelists today. Thank you very much, folks.
Thanks.
Okay. Good to see you again. Ricky. Yeah, I remember you.